I stood in the glass-walled conference room of my downtown office, staring at my father across the polished mahogany table. His expression, a mixture of desperation and wounded pride, was one I'd never seen before. $20 million, he repeated, sliding the business proposal toward me. A short-term loan to save the family legacy. My mother sat beside him, eyes fixed on her hands. The irony wasn't lost on me. 7 years earlier, they had packed my belongings in trash bags and changed the locks when I refused to abandon my impractical business dreams for law school. Now, as CEO of Vertex Capital, I alone held the power to rescue them from bankruptcy. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, illuminating the awards lining the walls, accolades for financial innovation, entrepreneurial excellence, and venture capital success. Outside my door, 35 employees navigated the open-concept workspace I'd designed to foster the collaboration and creativity that had built Vertex Capital from nothing into a $500 million firm. My executive assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Reeves, your 10 o'clock appointment is here." I drew a deep breath, straightening the tailored blazer that had cost more than my entire wardrobe during my first year on my own. "Send them in, Claire." The glass door swung open, and I maintained my composure as Richard and Margaret Reeves, my parents, stepped into my office for the first time. My father's eyes widened slightly as he took in the panoramic view of the city skyline, the subtle signifiers of success that surrounded us. My mother's gaze lingered on the family photo conspicuously absent from my desk. "Olivia," my father said, extending his hand formally as if we were meeting at an industry conference rather than as estranged family. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting." I shook his hand with the firm grip I'd perfected in countless business negotiations, noticing how his once imposing presence had diminished. His suit, while still well-made, hung slightly loose on his frame. Stress had carved new lines around his eyes and mouth. "Please, have a seat." I gestured toward the conference area where I conducted my most important business discussions. "Claire will bring coffee." My mother moved tentatively, as if unsure of her welcome in this space. "Your office is beautiful," she offered. "The view is remarkable." The view was a key selling point when I acquired the building last year. I replied evenly, watching their expressions register this information. The building, a prime piece of downtown real estate that housed not just my company but several other prestigious firms, represented exactly the kind of investment my father had once dismissed as beyond my capabilities. Claire arrived with coffee served in the handcrafted ceramic mugs I'd commissioned from an artisan I'd funded through her startup phase. Another small reminder of how different my world was from the one my parents had envisioned for me. "I understand. Reeves Manufacturing is experiencing some difficulties," I began, moving directly to business. 7 years of silence hadn't made me inclined toward small talk. My father cleared his throat. "Yes, we're facing a temporary cash flow situation complicated by some unexpected regulatory changes and supply chain issues." His voice took on the confident tone I remembered from childhood, the voice that had declared absolute truths about business, success, and my future. "Nothing structural. The company is fundamentally sound, with 50 years of solid performance. We simply need short-term capital to weather this transitional period." "I've reviewed your financials," I said, opening the folder before me. "Your situation appears considerably more serious than temporary cash flow issues." My mother flinched slightly. My father's jaw tightened. "You've lost market share consistently for the past 5 years," I continued. "Your manufacturing processes are outdated, your product line hasn't evolved significantly in a decade, and your debt-to-equity ratio is concerning. 3 banks have already declined your loan applications." I closed the folder. "That's not a transitional period. That's a company failing to adapt to changing market conditions. We built that company from nothing, my father said, defensive edge sharpening his voice. When I took over from my father, we had 1 factory and 20 employees. Now we have 5 facilities and 300 staff depending on us for their livelihoods. I'm aware of the company history, I replied. My grandfather's portrait had hung in our dining room throughout my childhood, his entrepreneurial legacy invoked like scripture whenever career paths were discussed. The irony that I had more in common with him than his son ever did wasn't lost on me. My mother spoke for the first time since her comment about the view. Olivia, we know things ended poorly between us. But this isn't about family feelings. It's about saving a business that supported our community for generations. I studied her face, the familiar features that had once represented safety before they'd hardened into disappointment when I'd chosen my own path. Let's be precise about how things ended, I said quietly. When I declined the law school acceptance you'd arranged without my knowledge and announced I was pursuing my business idea instead, you gave me 3 days to vacate the house. Dad canceled my health insurance, froze the college fund that my grandparents had established, and informed family friends that I'd had some kind of breakdown. The coffee in my mother's cup trembled slightly. My father's face flushed. When I called 6 months later to tell you I'd secured my first round of investment funding, you hung up. When I sent an invitation to the opening of my first office, it was returned unopened. When Vertex made the cover of Business Innovators magazine last year, the congratulatory call never came. We were concerned about you, my father interjected. You were throwing away a secure future on a pipe dream. A pipe dream that now manages over $500 million in assets, I noted. A pipe dream that employs 36 people at above-market salaries. A pipe dream that has launched 15 successful startups in the past 3 years. And we're proud of what you've accomplished, my mother said quickly. We were wrong, clearly, but families can have disagreements without— This wasn't a disagreement, I interrupted. A disagreement is choosing different restaurants for dinner. You disowned me for refusing to live the life you prescribed. You cut me off completely, financially, emotionally, practically, when I was barely an adult. Now you're here because you need something from me. My father leaned forward, abandoning pretense. Yes, we need help. The company needs help. I admit I handled things badly when you were younger. I was rigid in my thinking. Rigid, I repeated, the understatement almost laughable. We're willing to offer favorable terms, he continued, sliding a document across the table. Competitive? Interest. Convertible to equity if that's preferable. We've prepared detailed projections for the company's recovery once we implement the modernization plan. I glanced at the document without touching it. And what exactly is this modernization plan? For the next 20 minutes, my father outlined his strategy for updating manufacturing processes, refreshing product lines, and expanding into adjacent markets. The plan wasn't terrible, but it reflected the same incremental thinking that had allowed more innovative competitors to steadily erode Reeves Manufacturing's market position. When he finished, expectant silence filled the room. My parents watched me, waiting for the response that would determine the fate of their company, their employees, their legacy. The power dynamic that had defined our relationship had completely inverted. They had once held all the cards. Now I controlled the resources they desperately needed. I'll need time to consider this properly, I said finally. Vertex has specific investment criteria that any proposal must meet, regardless of who submits it. Of course, my father nodded, relief softening his features at this non-rejection. Take whatever time you need. Although, he added, the businessman, resurfacing, our situation does have some time sensitivity. I understand. I'll have an answer for you by the end of the week. I stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. Claire will show you out. As they gathered their things, my mother hesitated, then reached into her purse and withdrew a small box. "I brought this. It was meant for your 30th birthday last month." She placed it on the table, not quite meeting my eyes. Better late than never, I hope. After they left, I remained standing, looking out at the city where I'd rebuilt my life from nothing. The small gift box sat unopened on the table, a belated peace offering or perhaps just another attempt at manipulation. 7 years of silence followed by a business proposal and a birthday gift, as if the wound of rejection could be bandaged with a trinket and a percentage of interest. My phone buzzed with a text from Mia, my best friend and COO. How'd it go? With the parents? Still standing? I picked up the phone but didn't immediately reply. The question echoing in my mind wasn't whether I was still standing. I'd been standing firmly on my own 2 feet for years. The question was what to do with this sudden power to determine whether my parents' company would survive or fail. What was the right response to those who had once cast me aside now coming to me for salvation? The business case was questionable at best, but business had never been the only factor in family matters. I placed the gift box in my desk drawer, unopened and turned back to the window, watching clouds cast shifting shadows across the city that had welcomed me when my own family would not. Later that evening, I sat in my penthouse apartment, a glass of Cabernet untouched on the coffee table before me. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city lights like a living canvas, each pinpoint representing lives and stories entirely separate from my own complicated family drama. The spacious living room with its minimalist design and carefully curated art collection stood in stark contrast to the cramped studio apartment where I'd spent my first year of independence. The memory of that tiny space with its leaking faucet and temperamental heating systems surfaced vividly. I had slept on an air mattress for 3 months, saving every dollar for business expenses rather than personal comfort. My office had been a folding table purchased from a second-hand store. My executive chair, a discarded dining chair I'd refurbished myself. Those early days had been defined by a relentless hustle, working retail during the day while developing my business plan at night, surviving on instant noodles and determination. I opened my laptop and pulled up the file containing Reeves Manufacturing's financial records. The numbers told a story of gradual decline masked by periodic temporary recoveries, a company slowly losing relevance in a changing market. My father had built on my grandfather's foundation, expanding operations and increasing revenue throughout the 90s and early 2000s. But he had also grown complacent, resistant to the technological innovations and market shifts that had allowed more agile competitors to steadily erode their position. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My phone buzzed with a text from Mia. "Still waiting to hear how it went with the parents. Everything okay?" I typed back, "They need $20 million to save the company. Reviewing the proposal now." 3 dots appeared immediately, followed by, "Holy shit. Talk about karma. What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do with this unexpected power to impact my parents' future? The business case alone didn't justify the investment. Reeves Manufacturing could potentially be salvaged with significant restructuring and modernization, but the risk profile exceeded Vertex's usual parameters. If this proposal had come from strangers, I would have declined politely but firmly. But these weren't strangers. These were the people who had raised me for 18 years before deciding I wasn't worth supporting through a divergence from their predetermined path. I closed the laptop and moved to the window, watching a passenger jet's lights trace a path across the night sky. 7 years earlier, I had stood at a different window in a different city, watching a similar plane and wondering how my life had fractured so completely in less than a week. The memory emerged with painful clarity, returning home from my campus tour excited to share my decision to decline law school and instead pursue the business idea I'd been developing. I'd prepared a detailed presentation, complete with market research and financial projections. I'd practiced my pitch, anticipating questions and objections. I'd been naive enough to believe that my passion and preparation would convince them. Instead, my father had interrupted halfway through, his voice cold with disappointment. "This is absolute nonsense, Olivia. You've been accepted to Brookfield Law. Do you have any idea how many strings I pulled to make that happen?" "I didn't ask you to pull strings," I'd replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I don't want to be a lawyer. I never have." "Don't be ridiculous. This little hobby of yours isn't a career path." "It's not a hobby, Dad. I've been developing this concept for 2 years. I've already secured interest from—" "Enough." His hand had slammed down on the table, rattling the water glasses. "I didn't work my entire life to provide for you, so you could throw away a prestigious education on some harebrained scheme." My mother had remained silent throughout, her eyes downcast, tacitly supporting my father's position through her refusal to contradict him. "I'm not asking for your financial support," I'd said finally. "I have scholarship offers from the business incubator at Tech. I can work part-time while I get things started." "If you think we're going to stand by and watch you waste your potential, you're mistaken," my father had replied. "You will accept Brookfield's offer, or you will no longer be welcome in this house." It's that simple. I hadn't believed him. Not really. Not until 3 days later, when I'd returned from a meeting with a potential mentor to find my belongings packed in garbage bags on the front porch, and the locks changed. My mother had watched from an upstairs window as I'd loaded everything I could fit into my small car, her face a mask of painful resignation. A notification chime pulled me back to the present, an email from my father following up on our meeting with additional projections, and a reiterated assurance that this was a temporary situation requiring a family solution. Family solution. The phrase struck me as particularly ironic. Where was this concept of family obligation when I was 20 years old and sleeping in my car for a week before finding affordable housing? Where was this belief in supporting family members when I'd developed strep throat and had no health insurance because they'd canceled my coverage? I opened my desk drawer and removed the small gift box my mother had left. Inside was a pair of sapphire earrings I recognized immediately. They had belonged to my grandmother, my father's mother, who had passed away during my second year of college. I'd always admired them, but they had gone to my cousin Melissa after the funeral. A handwritten note accompanied them. "These should have been yours all along. I'm sorry it took so long to right this wrong. Love, Mom." The gesture stirred complicated emotions. Was this genuine remorse or strategic sentimentality, timed perfectly with their request for financial rescue? And even if the regret was real, did it erase the years of absence during the most challenging period of my life? I returned to the couch and opened my laptop again, this time pulling up photos from Vertex's early days. There I was, standing, proudly beside the first entrepreneur I'd funded, Sarah Chen, whose sustainable fashion brand now generated 8 figures annually. Another image showed the ribbon cutting for our first real office, a modest space we'd quickly outgrown. In each photo, the milestones of my success were documented, but my parents' absence was a constant, invisible presence. What would have happened if they had supported my vision? If they had offered guidance instead of ultimatums, encouragement instead of rejection? I might have avoided some painful early mistakes or reached success more quickly. But I also might never have developed the resilience and self-reliance that had become my greatest strengths. Their rejection, painful as it had been, had forced me to find resources within myself I might never have discovered otherwise. My phone rang, displaying Mia's name. "I can practically hear you overthinking from across town," she said when I answered. "Want company?" Mia had been there from the beginning, my first employee, who had believed in my vision enough to accept equity instead of a salary our first year. She had slept on my apartment floor during the weeks before our first IDAO. Funding came through, sharing my meals of ramen and determination. If anyone understood the complexity of this situation, it was her. "I'm opening another bottle of wine," I replied. "The good stuff from Sonoma." 20 minutes later, Mia was settled on my couch, glass in hand, offering the perspective I needed. "You've worked through the business case," she said. "What's the verdict?" "Objectively, it's borderline. Significant risk, but not without potential. They've let things slide for too long, but the core business still has value. With proper modernization and leadership change, it could be viable. Again." "And subjectively?" I sighed. "That's where it gets complicated. Part of me wants to say no, to let them experience the consequences of their rigid thinking and unwillingness to evolve, both in business and in how they treated me. And the other part? The other part recognizes that 300 people would lose their jobs if Reeves Manufacturing fails. People who had nothing to do with my parents' personal choices. People with families, mortgages, kids in college." Mia nodded. "So it's not really about your parents anymore." "Maybe it never should have been," I admitted. "Maybe I need to evaluate this as I would any other investment opportunity, based on potential, not personal history." "That sounds reasonable," Mia said. "Except for one thing." "What's that?" "You're human, Liv. This isn't just any investment opportunity. These are the people who threw you out when you needed them most. You're allowed to factor that into your decision." I stared into my wine glass, watching the light refract through the deep red liquid. "What would you do?" "I'd recognize the extraordinary position you're in," Mia replied carefully. "How many people get the chance to be exactly who they needed 7 years ago? To provide the support that was withheld from them?" Her words resonated with something I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. This wasn't just about business, or even about family reconciliation. It was about being the person I wished had existed when I was struggling. Someone who could recognize potential and provide opportunity without demanding conformity to their own vision. "But," Mia continued, "I'd also protect myself. If you decide to help them, it needs to be on your terms, with proper safeguards for both Vertex's investment and your personal boundaries." As Mia left an hour later, her parting words stayed with me. "Whatever you decide, make sure it's because it aligns with who you are now, not because of who they were then." Sleep eluded me that night. I spent hours reviewing the proposal, researching the industry further, and drafting alternative approaches to revitalizing Reeves Manufacturing. By dawn, I had 3 options clearly outlined, each with different levels of investment, control, and potential return. As the first light of morning broke over the city skyline, I made my decision, not based on vindication or revenge, but on the person I had become and the leader I aspired to be. I would meet with my parents again, but this time, I would be the one presenting a vision for the future. A vision that honored the company's legacy while embracing the innovation they had resisted for too long. Whatever happened next would be on my terms. Not as their daughter seeking approval, but as a successful business leader offering a path forward, to a company worth saving and perhaps to a relationship worth rebuilding, though on fundamentally different ground than before. 3 days later, I arrived at Reeves Manufacturing headquarters 30 minutes before our scheduled meeting. I wanted to see the facility without the sanitized tour my father would undoubtedly have prepared. The security guard at the entrance recognized my name immediately, his eyes widening slightly as he processed my visitor badge. "Ms. Reeves, we weren't expecting you until 10 Rao." "I know. I'd like to walk the production floor first if that's possible." His hesitation was brief but noticeable. "Of course. Let me find someone to escort you." "No need," I replied, removing a facility map from my portfolio. I grew up visiting this plant. I remember my way around. This wasn't entirely true. While I had visited the main facility many times during childhood, the layout had changed over the years as operations expanded. But I wanted to observe without the filter of an official guide, to see the daily reality rather than the polished presentation. What I found was both better and worse than expected. The main production lines operated efficiently, with experienced staff who clearly took pride in their work. Equipment was well maintained, though noticeably outdated compared to industry standards. The atmosphere was professional but subdued, lacking the energy and innovation I fostered at Vertex. Most telling was the research and development department, tucked away in a corner of the building that hadn't been renovated in at least 15 years. 3 engineers huddled around a prototype, working with equipment that belonged in a museum rather than a forward-thinking manufacturing operation. This explained volumes about why Reeves had fallen behind more innovative competitors. "Olivia?" My father's voice carried across the production floor. He strode toward me, surprise and mild annoyance competing for dominance in his expression. "We weren't expecting you until 10. "I wanted to see things as they are, not as you'd present them," I replied evenly. His mouth tightened, but he nodded. "Fair enough. What do you think?" "I think your core operations are sound but stagnant. Your R&D department is woefully under-resourced, and your energy efficiency metrics are probably bleeding your profit margins." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, that I understood his business in ways he hadn't anticipated. "We can discuss all of that in the meeting. Your mother and the executive team are waiting in the conference room." The Reeves manufacturing conference room hadn't changed since my last visit over 7 years ago. The same mahogany table dominated the space, surrounded by the same leather chairs. The walls still displayed framed photos chronicling the company's 5-decade history. My grandfather breaking ground on the first facility, my father accepting industry awards, ribbon cuttings for expansions that had once symbolized unstoppable growth. My mother sat midway down the table next to Harrison Wells, the company's longtime CFO. 2 other familiar faces completed the executive team: Patricia Lowry, Operations Director, and Michael Chen, Sales Director. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to barely concealed skepticism as I entered. "Thank you all for accommodating my schedule," I began, setting up my laptop. "I've reviewed the proposal thoroughly and conducted additional market analysis to inform my response." "Before you begin," my father interjected, "I want to acknowledge that this is an unusual situation. For those who may not be aware, Olivia is not just the CEO of Vertex Capital, but also my daughter." "Stepdaughter," I corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it. My mother's face fell slightly. While technically accurate, she had married my father when I was 3, after my biological mother's death. The distinction had never been relevant until this moment. Somehow, the correction created necessary distance between us in this business context. "Yes, of course," my father continued smoothly. "Regardless of the personal connection, I've asked Olivia to evaluate our funding request with the same rigor she would apply to any potential investment. We want this to be a sound business decision for all parties." "I appreciate that clarification," I replied, "because my analysis has led me to a different conclusion than the one outlined in your proposal." The tension in the room thickened. Patricia Lowry's pen stilled over her notepad. Michael Chen straightened in his chair. My father's confident demeanor faltered slightly. "Instead of a loan, I'd like to propose an equity investment with specific performance targets and management restructuring requirements." "Equity investment?" My father's voice sharpened. "That wasn't what we discussed. You presented a need and asked for my help. This is what I'm offering." I clicked to the first slide of my presentation. Vertex would provide $25 million, not the $20 million requested, in exchange for a 40% ownership stake and 3 board seats. 40%? Harrison sputtered. That's far more than necessary for the capital provided. The valuation reflects current market realities, not historical performance, I replied. Additionally, $5 million of the investment would be specifically allocated to rebuilding your R&D department with state-of-the-art equipment and expanded staff. My father's face had gone rigid. That level of ownership would essentially give Vertex control over a company that's been in our family for 3 generations. Not quite control, but significant influence, I acknowledged. Which brings me to the management restructuring component. I clicked to the next slide, displaying an organizational chart that maintained my father as chairman of the board, but introduced a new position, Chief Innovation Officer. This role would report directly to the board and have authority to drive technological advancement and market repositioning across all departments. The CIO would be selected by Vertex, with board approval. You want to bring in an outsider to tell us how to run our business? Patricia asked, indignation coloring. Her tone, not necessarily an outsider. I met my father's gaze directly. I would recommend transitioning you, Dad, to this role. Your industry knowledge combined with fresh strategic direction could be powerful, but it would mean bringing in a new CEO with experience in modernizing traditional manufacturing operations. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's expression moved through shock, anger, and something harder to identify, perhaps grudging respect. My mother spoke for the first time. You want to demote Richard? I want to position him where his strengths can have the greatest impact while addressing the company's most critical weakness, innovation. I turned back to my father. When was the last time you were excited about a new product or process, Dad? When did you last spend time in R&D, getting your hands dirty with development rather than drowning in administrative responsibilities? Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even longing. The CEO role requires a different skill set now than when you took it over from Grandpa, I continued. The market has changed. Technology has changed. Consumer expectations have changed. Fighting those changes has brought the company to this crisis point. And you think you know better than someone with 30 years in this industry? Harrison challenged. I think fresh perspective has value, I replied evenly. I also think my track record of identifying potential and creating growth speaks for itself. I continued through the presentation, outlining the remaining elements of my proposal. A modernization plan more aggressive than their original proposal. New sustainability initiatives that would reduce operating costs while opening new market segments, and a talent development program to ensure long-term organizational health. This investment isn't just about surviving the current crisis, I explained. It's about transforming Reeves Manufacturing into a company that can thrive for another 50 years. But that requires more than money. It requires fundamental change in how you operate and how you think about the business. As I concluded, the room remained silent. Michael Chen studied the financial projections with intensity. Patricia made rapid notes. Harrison looked shell-shocked. My mother watched my father, waiting for his reaction. Finally, my father spoke. You've clearly put considerable thought into this proposal. I have. May we have the room, please? He asked the executive team. I'd like to speak with Olivia privately. After they filed out, my parents and I sat in weighted silence. Outside the conference room windows, the production floor continued its rhythmic operations, a mechanical heartbeat sustaining the company my grandfather had founded with a second mortgage, and an innovative idea for manufacturing processes that had, in their time, revolutionized the industry. This isn't what we asked for, my father said finally. No, it isn't, I agreed. What you asked for wouldn't solve the underlying problems. It would postpone the inevitable while burning through capital that could be used for actual transformation. And you believe you know what's best for the company I've run for 25 years? I believe I see opportunities and challenges that you're too close to recognize, I replied. Just as you once thought you knew what was best for my future, despite having never experienced the business landscape I was entering. My mother flinched at the parallel I'd drawn. My father's jaw tightened, but he didn't dispute the comparison. The hardest thing about accepting help, I continued more gently, is recognizing that it may not come in the form you expected. 7 years ago, I needed support to pursue my vision, not to follow yours. Today, Reeves Manufacturing needs transformation, not a temporary financial bandage. And if we decline your offer? My father asked. Then you'll need to find another solution quickly. But I suspect other potential investors will identify the same issues and require similar changes, likely with less favorable terms and less consideration for the company's legacy and workforce. My father stood and walked to the window, looking out at the facility floor he had expanded from 1 building to 5 over his career. His shoulders carried the weight of difficult decisions, the same weight I had felt when forced to choose between family expectations and my own path. I need to discuss this with the board, he said finally. Your proposal is not what we anticipated. Of course, I gathered my materials. I'll need your answer within 5 business days. After that, I'll need to allocate the capital to other investment opportunities. As I prepared to leave, my mother spoke. Did you open my gift? The question caught me off guard, personal sentiment intruding on business discussions. Yes, the earrings are beautiful. They were always meant for you, she said softly. I should have made sure you received them years ago. I nodded, unsure how to respond to this small acknowledgement of past wrongs in the middle of complex business negotiations. Whatever happens with the company, she continued, I hope we might find a way forward personally. We've missed so much. The simplicity of her statement, we've missed so much, struck me with unexpected force, not accusatory or defensive, just a recognition of shared loss spanning 7 years of birthdays, holidays, achievements, and ordinary moments of connection. One step at a time, I replied. Let's resolve the business question first. As I walked through the facility toward the exit, I passed the worn plaque that had hung in the main corridor since my childhood. It displayed my grandfather's quote, "From the company's founding, we build things to last because we build for generations beyond our own." The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had built for future generations could never have imagined that his granddaughter and son would be negotiating across a divide of years and hurt, trying to determine if what he had built could be saved, and at what cost to pride and the past. In the parking lot, I paused before getting into my car, looking back at the Reeves Manufacturing sign above the entrance. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine my name associated with this legacy, not as the dutiful daughter following a predetermined path, but as the change agent who helped transform a struggling company into something that could truly endure for generations to come. Whether my father could accept this different vision remained to be seen. 4 days after presenting my counter-proposal, I received a message from my father requesting another meeting, this time at neutral territory. He suggested Meridian, an upscale restaurant downtown known for its private dining rooms where business deals were often negotiated away from prying eyes. The choice of venue signaled that he was taking my proposal seriously. Meridian wasn't a place for outright rejection, but for discussion and potential compromise. I arrived 15 minutes early, as was my habit for important meetings. The maitre d' escorted me to a secluded room with a single table overlooking the city park. A bottle of Barolo, my father's preferred wine for significant occasions, was already breathing on the table. The gesture wasn't lost on me. He remembered my developing appreciation for Italian wines during family dinners in my late teens, before our relationship fractured. My father arrived precisely on time, alone. I had expected my mother, or at least Harrison Wells, to accompany him. The absence of additional participants suggested this conversation would venture beyond pure business into more personal territory. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, shaking my hand before taking his seat. The formality between us remained, though something in his demeanor had shifted since our last encounter. The defensive pride had receded, replaced by a thoughtful hesitation I rarely associated with the decisive businessman I'd known. "I've reviewed your proposal with the board and executive team," he continued after a server had poured our wine, and departed. "It's comprehensive, forward-thinking, and addresses weaknesses in our operation that I've been reluctant to acknowledge." I maintained a neutral expression, though his admission surprised me. Richard Reeves rarely conceded weaknesses in his strategic thinking. "The board is prepared to accept most elements of your proposal, with some modifications." He slid a document folder across the table. "We're comfortable with the investment amount and general modernization strategy. The sticking point is the management restructuring." I opened the folder, scanning the annotated version of my proposal. "You've accepted the equity stake but rejected the leadership changes." "Not rejected entirely," he clarified. "We propose maintaining current leadership for a transitional period of 18 months, with quarterly performance reviews against agreed metrics. If those metrics aren't met, then your proposed restructuring would automatically trigger." I considered this counter-proposal. It was rational from their perspective, a chance to prove they could implement necessary changes without immediate leadership disruption. But it also risked prolonging problems that stemmed directly from the current management approach. 18 months is too long," I replied. "Markets move quickly. Your competitors won't wait while you navigate a gradual transition. What would you consider reasonable?" 6 months, with monthly progress reviews and Vertex representation in weekly executive meetings to monitor implementation. My father's expression tightened slightly at the suggestion of such close oversight, but he didn't dismiss it outright. 9 months might be workable, with bi-weekly rather than weekly monitoring. 9 months, with the understanding that certain key initiatives start immediately, not after a planning phase. I pulled out my tablet and opened a document I'd prepared in anticipation of negotiation. Specifically, the R&D expansion, sustainability retrofits, and new product development process must begin within 30 days of funding. He studied me with a mixture of frustration and something that resembled respect. "You don't compromise easily." "I learned from watching you," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. The corner of his mouth twitched, nearly a smile. 9 months, immediate initiative launch, bi-weekly monitoring. I believe we can work with that. As we continued negotiating specific terms and targets, I recognized the strange symmetry of our situation. Here we sat, father and daughter, engaged in the kind of substantive business discussion he had once assumed I wasn't capable of having. The skills he'd dismissed as unnecessary for my future were precisely the capabilities now determining whether his company would survive. After resolving the major points of contention, my father leaned back in his chair, wineglass in hand. "There's one more element I'd like to discuss, though it's not included in the formal documents." "What's that?" "Your personal involvement." He set his glass down carefully. "Beyond Vertex's oversight role, would you consider taking one of the board seats yourself?" The question caught me off guard. "Why would you want that?" "Because despite our differences, you understand this company in ways an outside investor never could. You grew up watching it evolve. You know its history, its culture, the families that depend on it." He paused. "And because you've proven you have vision that I lack." The admission seemed to cost him something, decades of certainty giving way to a humility I'd never witnessed in him before. "I'm not asking for sentimentality," he continued. "I'm suggesting your direct involvement would benefit both the company and Vertex's investment. Your perspective would be valuable." 7 years ago, I would have given anything to hear my father acknowledge the value of my perspective. Now, I met his statement with measured consideration rather than eager gratitude. "I'll need to discuss it with my executive team," I replied. My primary obligation is to Vertex and our investors. He nodded, accepting this business-first approach. Of course. As our meal concluded and we finalized the broad strokes of our agreement, leaving lawyers to handle specific language, my father hesitated before standing. There's something else I need to say, Olivia. Something not related to the deal. I waited, unsure what direction this might take. I was wrong. The words emerged with difficulty, each syllable weighted with pride reluctantly set aside. Not just about the company's direction, but about you, about your potential and your path. The statement hung between us, simultaneously inadequate and monumental. 7 years of absence distilled into 3 words. When you left for college, I had such a clear vision of your future. Brookfield Law, followed by a corporate position, then eventually returning to lead Reeves with the legal expertise I never had. I was so certain of that path that I couldn't see any alternative as valid. He looked down at his hands, the capable hands that had built physical things while mine had constructed less tangible but equally substantial value. I couldn't see that what you wanted wasn't a rejection of our family legacy, but a different way of honoring your own capabilities. It wasn't about rejection, I confirmed quietly. It was about authenticity. I couldn't live someone else's version of my life. I understand that now. He met my gaze directly. Watching you present your analysis of our company, seeing the clarity of your thinking, the confidence in your approach. I recognize the successful business leader you've become, not despite taking your own path, but because of it. His acknowledgement should have felt vindicating. Instead, it surfaced a complexity of emotions I hadn't anticipated. Grief for the years of mentorship and connection we might have shared, satisfaction at the recognition, wariness about its timing coinciding with his need for financial rescue. I appreciate you saying that, I replied carefully. But understanding doesn't erase the past. You and Mom didn't just disagree with my choices, you abandoned me entirely. That can't be undone with a single conversation, regardless of how the business negotiation concludes. He nodded, accepting this boundary. I'm not asking for immediate reconciliation, just an opening for something better than 7 more years of silence, whatever that might look like. As we prepared to leave, he added, Your mother would like to see you, outside of business contexts. She's been the one pushing hardest for us to acknowledge our mistakes, long before the company's troubles forced the issue. This revelation surprised me. My mother had always presented a united front with my father, her own opinions subsumed into his more dominant personality. The thought that she had advocated for reconnection behind the scenes added another layer to my understanding of their dynamic, and raised questions about opportunities for contact I might have missed through my own protective distance. I'll think about it, I promised, neither committing to nor rejecting the possibility of a more personal reconnection. Outside the restaurant, as we prepared to part ways, my father extended his hand. The formal gesture echoed our first meeting in my office, but something had shifted. This handshake wasn't between estranged family members awkwardly navigating a business transaction, but between 2 professionals who had found a path toward mutual respect, if not yet personal reconciliation. We'll have the revised agreement to your legal team tomorrow, he said. I'll ensure they review it promptly. As I watched him walk toward his car, I realized that our negotiation had accomplished something beyond determining Reeves Manufacturing's future. It had established a new foundation for our relationship, one based not on familial obligation or authority, but on earned respect and recognized capability. Whether that foundation could support rebuilding personal connections remained to be seen, but for the first time in 7 years, I was open to the possibility. Driving back to my office, I called Mia to update her on the meeting's outcome. So they accepted most of your terms? She asked, after I'd summarized the negotiation. With modifications I can live with, yes. And the personal side of things? I considered how to characterize what had transpired between my father and me. It's evolving. He acknowledged he was wrong about my path, seems to genuinely respect what I've built. Well, $25 million tends to command respect, Mia noted dryly. It's more than that, I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. The terms we negotiated actually give them more autonomy than my original proposal. If this were purely about financial leverage, I could have pushed harder. So what happens now? Family dinners and holiday reunions? Nothing that dramatic, but perhaps something better than complete estrangement. I paused, watching the city pass by through my car window. I'm thinking about taking one of the board seats myself. Mia's silence spoke volumes. I know. I continued. It's complicated, but keeping Vertex's interests protected while giving Reeves the best chance at transformation probably requires my direct involvement. And it has nothing to do with reconnecting with your family business? Her skepticism carried through the phone line. It doesn't have nothing to do with it, I admitted. But any personal considerations are secondary to making this a successful investment. Just be careful, Liv. Guard your heart as carefully as you guard Vertex's capital. Her concern was valid. I had built my life and company on clear-eyed assessment of risk and opportunity. Allowing family emotion to cloud business judgment could undermine everything I'd worked for. Yet completely divorcing the personal from the professional in this situation seemed not just impossible but perhaps undesirable. The wisdom lay in finding the balance that would honor both aspects without compromising either. As I pulled into the Vertex parking garage, I found myself thinking about my grandfather, a man I barely remembered but whose entrepreneurial spirit had apparently passed directly to me, skipping a generation. He had built something meaningful from nothing, guided by vision and determination. Now I had the opportunity to help preserve and transform his legacy, not as the dutiful heir my father had imagined, but as a capable investor and innovator in my own right. If he were alive, I wondered what he would think of this full-circle moment, his granddaughter returning not as a prodigal, but as a savior, bringing both capital and fresh vision to the company he had founded. I liked to think he would recognize something of himself in my journey, in my willingness to forge my own path despite obstacles and doubts. Whatever came next, whether limited to a successful business partnership or expanding to include personal reconciliation, would be built on fundamentally different ground than before, not on familial obligation or authority, but on mutual respect. Between capable adults who had each created something of value in the world, though through very different paths. 3 months after finalizing the investment agreement, I walked through Reeves Manufacturing's main facility again. But this time, the experience was markedly different. The production floor hummed with a renewed energy. Strategic areas had been reorganized to improve workflow efficiency. The first phase of energy-efficient lighting had been installed, reducing electricity consumption by 22%, while providing better illumination for detailed work. Most telling was the transformation of the R&D department. The cramped, outdated corner had expanded into a proper innovation center, with new equipment and 4 additional engineers recruited from top manufacturing technology firms. Interactive design stations had replaced drafting tables. Prototype. Development that once took weeks now required days. The entire atmosphere had shifted from maintaining the status quo to actively creating the future. Carter Wilson, the department's newly appointed director, walked me through their current projects with infectious enthusiasm. We're completely reimagining the Meridian product line, he explained, gesturing to digital renderings displayed on a wall-mounted screen. By incorporating smart technology and sustainable materials, we're not just updating existing products, we're creating an entirely new category. What's been the response from the senior team? I asked, knowing that innovation often faced resistance from traditionalists within established companies. Carter glanced toward my father's office before answering. Surprisingly supportive. Mr. Reeves visits almost daily, asking questions and offering historical context that's actually been valuable. He seems genuinely engaged with the process. This aligned with reports I'd received during bi-weekly monitoring meetings. My father had indeed embraced his refocused role with unexpected vigor, freed from daily operational concerns handled by other executives. He had reconnected with the creative aspects of the business that had energized him in his younger years. As if summoned by our conversation, my father emerged from a nearby conference room. He noticed us immediately and approached with purposeful strides. "Olivia, I didn't realize you were visiting today." His tone held none of the defensiveness that had characterized our early interactions after the investment. Instead, he seemed eager to showcase progress. "Quarterly board meeting preparation," I explained. "I wanted to see developments firsthand before reviewing the reports." "Perfect timing. We're just finalizing the prototype for the new commercial line. Would you like to see it?" He led me through the facility to a secure development area that hadn't existed during my previous visit. Inside, a team of engineers and designers clustered around what appeared to be a reimagined version of Reeves's flagship industrial component system. "We've reduced material usage by 18% while increasing durability by 27%, my father explained, pride evident in his voice. "And the modular design allows for easier upgrades as technology evolves." The technical specifications impressed me, but more significant was witnessing my father's passionate engagement with innovation, something that had been notably absent during our initial negotiations. He spoke with the team as a collaborator, rather than an authority figure, asking insightful questions and building on their ideas rather than directing or constraining their thinking. Later, in his office, now relocated closer to R&D than to Executive Row, we discussed broader strategic developments over coffee. "The sustainability initiatives are already improving our bottom line," he noted, referencing performance data on his tablet. "Energy costs down, material waste reduced, and we've secured 3 new contracts specifically because of our green manufacturing processes." "The market has been demanding these changes for years," I observed. "Your competitors have been making similar moves." "Yes, but most are implementing piecemeal solutions rather than comprehensive transformation." He set down his tablet, meeting my gaze directly. "Your investment thesis was correct, Olivia. Incremental change wouldn't have saved us." The acknowledgement, delivered without reservation, represented significant evolution in our professional relationship. 3 months earlier, such admission would have been nearly impossible for him. "The 9-month evaluation period is approaching its midpoint," I noted. "Based on current metrics, you're ahead of target on innovation and sustainability, but still lagging on market expansion and talent development." He nodded, accepting the assessment without defensiveness. "We've prioritized building the foundation first. Market expansion is next. We're finalizing strategies for both domestic growth and potential international partnerships. As for talent, we've revised compensation structures to be more competitive and implemented the mentorship program your team recommended." The changes extended beyond operational improvements. The company culture had begun shifting from hierarchical deference to collaborative innovation. Employees at all levels were encouraged to contribute ideas, with a formal process for evaluating and implementing viable suggestions. This cultural evolution hadn't been explicitly part of our agreement, but represented perhaps the most significant transformation underway. "How's the executive team adapting?" I asked, knowing that entrenched leadership often presented the greatest resistance to organizational change. "Mixed responses," my father admitted. "Harrison is struggling. The financial transparency requirements have been particularly challenging for him. He's managed our books the same way for 20 years and sees the new reporting standards as unnecessary oversight." "And the others?" "Patricia has surprised everyone. Once she understood the vision, she became its strongest advocate among the long-timers. Michael is more cautious but implementing the new sales approach effectively. He paused. We'll likely need to replace Harrison before the evaluation period concludes. His resistance is becoming an obstacle. The fact that my father could acknowledge the need to replace his longtime CFO and friend signaled his commitment to genuine transformation rather than superficial compliance. It couldn't have been an easy conclusion to reach. Vertex can help identify suitable candidates. When you're ready, I offered. We have an extensive network in financial leadership. I'd appreciate that. Our discussion continued through operational details and strategic plans, the conversation flowing naturally between us as business peers, rather than estranged family members. Only when we reached the end of our agenda did the personal dimension resurface. Your mother asks about you, he said, his tone shifting slightly. She'd like to know if you might be open to having lunch with her sometime. Just the two of you. The request hung between us, bridging professional collaboration and potential personal reconciliation. 3 months of productive business interaction had established a foundation of mutual respect, but family relationships required different kinds of healing. I might be open to that, I replied carefully. Not immediately, but perhaps soon. He nodded, accepting this measured response without pushing further. She'll be glad to hear it. As I prepared to leave, he hesitated, then retrieved something from his desk drawer. There's something else you should see. We found this while reorganizing the archive room during the renovation. He handed me a worn leather portfolio that I recognized immediately. My grandfather's idea journal, a collection of concepts, sketches, and observations he had maintained throughout his career. I had been fascinated by it as a child, spending hours examining his neat drawings and detailed notes whenever allowed access to this family treasure. I thought it was lost in the storage facility fire 5 years ago, I said, carefully opening the cover to reveal the familiar handwriting. It was in my office safe. I'd forgotten taking it home after the quarterly review that coincided with the fire. He watched as I gently turned the pages. There's something on page 42 you might find interesting. I located the page and found a detailed concept sketch dated April 1982, a design for a modular manufacturing system remarkably similar to innovations being implemented in smart factories today. My grandfather had envisioned automated component, exchange and adaptive production flows decades before they became industry standards. He was so far ahead of his time, I murmured, studying the meticulous drawings. Look at the notation in the margin, my father directed. In my grandfather's precise handwriting was a note I'd never noticed during my childhood examinations. For Olivia someday, she has the vision to make this real. I stared at the words, written when I was barely 4 years old, yet somehow, presaging my future role in transforming the company. He saw something in you even then, my father said quietly, something I was too blinded by my own expectations to recognize until it was almost too late. The journal represented more than a family heirloom. It symbolized a legacy of innovation that had skipped a generation to find expression in my own entrepreneurial journey. My grandfather had recognized a kindred spirit in his granddaughter, a connection my father had missed until circumstances forced him to see me clearly. I'd like you to have it, he continued. It belongs with the, person who truly embodies his innovative spirit. The gesture moved me more deeply than I anticipated. Thank you. I'll treasure it. As I drove away from the facility that afternoon, the leather portfolio beside me on the passenger seat, I reflected on the unexpected path that had led me back to Reeves Manufacturing. What had begun as a business transaction complicated by personal history was evolving into something more nuanced, a partnership that honored the company's legacy while creating space for its future evolution, much like the relationship my father and I were cautiously rebuilding. The transformation underway at Reeves paralleled shifts in my own perspective. I had entered negotiations determined to maintain emotional distance, to make decisions based purely on business considerations rather than family sentiment. Yet I was discovering that the most effective path forward integrated both. Informed business judgment, enriched by understanding of the company's history and culture, personal boundaries that allowed for professional collaboration without requiring immediate emotional reconciliation. This integration didn't represent compromise but maturation. The capacity to hold seemingly opposing truths simultaneously. I could acknowledge my father's past mistakes while appreciating his current efforts. I could protect Vertex's investment interests while contributing to my family company's revitalization. I could maintain appropriate personal boundaries while remaining open to potential healing over time. The journal resting beside me embodied this integration, a tangible connection between past innovation and future potential, between my grandfather's legacy and my own path forward. Its presence reminded me that transformation rarely follows a linear progression. Rather, it often circles back to incorporate elements of the past into new configurations that serve the future more effectively. As I approached the city center, where Vertex headquarters awaited, I realized that the most significant transformation wasn't happening at Reeves Manufacturing but within my understanding of success. 7 years earlier, I had measured achievement through complete separation from my family's expectations. Now I was discovering a more nuanced conception, the ability to honor my authentic path while finding points of meaningful connection with my roots. This evolution didn't diminish my independent accomplishments, but expanded their context, placing my individual journey within a larger narrative of innovation and resilience that stretched backward through my grandfather and forward into future possibilities I was helping to create. The circle hadn't closed but widened, creating space for both autonomy and connection to coexist. 6 months into our investment partnership, the transformation at Reeves Manufacturing was proceeding ahead of projections in most areas. Modernization efforts had revitalized production efficiency, quality metrics showed significant improvement, and the first wave of innovative product lines was preparing for market launch. Employee engagement scores had risen dramatically as the culture shifted from hierarchical to collaborative. Even Harrison Wells, after initial resistance, had embraced the new financial transparency standards once he understood how they improved decision-making across departments. Then came the crisis no one had anticipated. I was in a strategy meeting with Vertex's investment team when Claire knocked urgently on the conference room door. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but I have Richard Reeves on the line. He says, it's an emergency regarding Reeves Manufacturing." The tension in her voice made it clear this wasn't a routine matter. I excused myself and took the call in my office. "Olivia, we've got a serious situation," my father said without preamble. "Globetech just announced they're acquiring Westford Industries." The significance registered immediately. Globetech was a multinational conglomerate known for aggressive expansion in traditional manufacturing sectors. Westford was Reeves's largest competitor and had been struggling financially for several quarters, a situation we'd been monitoring as a potential opportunity. "When?" I asked, already pulling up financial news sites on my computer. "The announcement went out 20 minutes ago. The deal closes in 45 days. His voice held controlled urgency. "This changes everything about our competitive landscape." He wasn't exaggerating. Globetech had nearly unlimited resources and a reputation for ruthless efficiency after acquisitions. They typically consolidated operations, eliminated redundancies, along with the associated jobs, and leveraged economies of scale to undercut pricing from smaller competitors. "I'm on my way," I said. "Assemble the executive team and the innovation leads. We need to develop a response strategy immediately." 90 minutes later, I walked into Reeves Manufacturing's newly renovated conference room where the leadership team had gathered. Digital displays showed Globetech's stock rising 3% on news of the acquisition, while industry analysts speculated about the implications for smaller manufacturers like Reeves. "They'll target our key customers first," Michael Chen, the sales director, was saying as I entered. GlobeTech always follows the same playbook. Identify major revenue sources and offer aggressive pricing incentives to switch suppliers. My father nodded in acknowledgement as I took my seat. Olivia, thank you for coming so quickly. We've been outlining what we know about GlobeTech's typical post-acquisition strategy. Patricia Lowry pulled up a comparative analysis on the main screen. Based on their previous acquisitions, we can expect them to complete integration within 120 days, consolidate Westford's production facilities within 6 months, and begin targeted market penetration against competitors like us within 9 months. That timeline is too generous, I interjected. GlobeTech knows about our transformation efforts. They'll see us as a growing threat rather than a declining competitor. They'll accelerate their timeline to disrupt our momentum before our new product lines fully launch. The room fell silent as this reality sank in. The transformation that had been proceeding so successfully now faced an existential challenge from a competitor with vastly superior resources. "What are our options?" Harrison asked, the urgency of the situation having united even the most change-resistant members of the team. "Standard defensive playbooks won't work," I said. "We can't compete on price or scale with GlobeTech. If we try to match their approach, we'll deplete our resources before making a dent in their strategy." "So what do we do?" Patricia pressed. "Just surrender our market position?" "No," my father said quietly, his gaze fixed on the prototype display in the corner of the room. "We changed the game entirely." All eyes turned to him as he stood and approached the display featuring Reeves' next-generation product designs. GlobeTech excels at traditional manufacturing economics, volume production, cost reduction, distribution efficiency. But they consistently underperform in one critical area: innovation. He turned to face the team. They acquire innovation rather than developing it internally. By the time they fully integrate Westford, we can establish leadership in the next generation of products they haven't even considered yet. I recognize the strategic pivot immediately. "You're suggesting we accelerate our innovation timeline significantly." "Not just accelerate, reimagine completely," he replied with growing conviction. "We've been developing these new product lines as evolutionary improvements. What if instead we position them as revolutionary alternatives that make GlobeTech's newly acquired product catalog obsolete before they've finished the integration?" The boldness of the proposal energized the room. Carter Wilson from R&D leaned forward eagerly. "The embedded sensor technology we've been testing could be adapted to provide capabilities neither Westford nor GlobeTech have in their development pipeline. If we prioritize those features rather than treating them as future enhancements, we could create a category distinction rather than competing on traditional metrics," I finished, already seeing the potential. For the next 3 hours, the team worked intensively to reshape our strategy in response to the GlobeTech threat. What emerged wasn't merely a defensive posture, but a completely reimagined approach that would leapfrog conventional competition to establish leadership in emerging product categories. The plan was ambitious, requiring significant acceleration of our innovation timeline and reallocation of resources from gradual transformation to focused disruption. It would strain our already stretched team and require additional capital investment beyond what we'd initially projected. As the meeting concluded and action items were assigned, my father asked me to stay behind. When we were alone, he voiced the concern that had likely been forming throughout the strategic discussion. "This pivot requires additional investment beyond what was outlined in our agreement," he acknowledged. "The board will want to know if Vertex is prepared to increase its commitment given these changed market conditions." The question carried both business and personal implications. As Vertex's representative, I needed to evaluate the adjusted risk profile objectively. As someone invested in Reeves's success beyond financial returns, I felt the weight of 300 employees whose futures now hung in a more precarious balance. "I'll need to review the projections and discuss with my investment committee," I replied, maintaining professional distance despite the personal stakes. The accelerated timeline changes our risk assessment significantly. I understand. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. For what it's worth, I believe this challenge may be exactly what we needed. A multinational competitor threatening our market position was what we needed? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. Not the threat itself, but the opportunity it creates for complete reinvention. His expression held an energy I recognized from my grandfather's journal entries, the excitement of solving complex problems through innovative thinking rather than conventional approaches. Gradual transformation might have improved our position incrementally, but this forces us to make the leap we've been hesitating to take. I considered his perspective. There was truth in it. Crisis often accelerated innovation in ways comfort never could. My own greatest growth at Vertex had come during periods of significant challenge rather than smooth sailing. The board meeting is next week, I said. I'll present the revised projections and capital requirements then. In the meantime, we should proceed as if approval is forthcoming. We can't afford to lose momentum while waiting for formal authorization. He nodded agreement. I've scheduled an all-hands meeting tomorrow morning to communicate the GlobeTech situation and our strategic pivot. Your presence would be valuable if your schedule permits. The invitation represented more than a business courtesy. Having me stand with leadership during this challenging announcement would signal unified commitment from both operational management and investment partners. It would provide reassurance to employees concerned about their future in the face of this competitive threat. I'll be there, I confirmed. As I gathered my materials to leave, my father hesitated before adding, Your mother mentioned you two had lunch last week. The statement carried an unspoken question. I had indeed finally accepted my mother's invitation for a private meal. Our first one-on-one conversation in more than 7 years. We had met at a small cafe far from both Reeves Manufacturing and Vertex offices, neutral territory for beginning the delicate process of personal reconnection. We did, I acknowledged, not elaborating further. The lunch had been both awkward and surprisingly meaningful, a halting start to rebuilding understanding beyond the professional relationship that had developed between my father and me through our business partnership. She said it went well. His tone remained carefully neutral, respecting the boundaries I'd established around personal reconciliation. It was a start, I offered. There's a lot of history to work through. He nodded, accepting this measured response. Time and consistent effort can achieve remarkable things, in business and in relationships. The observation struck me as particularly meaningful, coming from a man who had once viewed both business and relationships through the lens of control rather than collaboration. His evolution over these months had been as significant as the company's transformation, though less visible in metrics and projections. Driving back to Vertex after the emergency strategy session, I reflected on how thoroughly circumstances had upended my expectations. 6 months ago, I'd assumed my involvement with Reeves would remain primarily financial and strategic, with personal reconciliation a distant secondary consideration at best. Now I found myself deeply engaged in both dimensions, committed to the company's success beyond investment returns and cautiously navigating renewed family connections with boundaries that honored my independent journey. The GlobeTech challenge had further complicated this intertwining of business and personal stakes. If Reeves failed to execute its ambitious pivot successfully, the consequences would extend beyond financial loss to impact generations of families who had built their lives around the company. My response to the crisis would affect not just Vertex's portfolio performance, but the community that had shaped my earliest understanding of business and purpose. This responsibility might have felt overwhelming earlier in my career. Now, however, I recognized it as the natural consequence of leadership that integrated professional capability with personal values. The decisions ahead would require both analytical rigor and human sensitivity. a balance I'd been developing throughout my journey from rejected daughter to successful entrepreneur to potential bridge between past and future. As I entered Vertex headquarters, Mia intercepted me in the lobby, having heard about the GlobeTech situation through industry contacts. "So much for the smooth transition period," she commented as we walked toward my office. "What's the plan?" "Complete strategic pivot," I replied. "We're accelerating the innovation timeline significantly and repositioning to make their acquisition irrelevant rather than trying to compete directly." She raised an eyebrow. "Bold approach. Additional capital required, I assume." "Likely, yes. I'll have revised projections for the investment committee by tomorrow afternoon." "And how are you doing with all this?" Her question deliberately shifted from business assessment to personal check-in. This can't be easy, having family and financial stakes so thoroughly entangled now. The question gave me pause. Surprisingly, I'm finding clarity rather than confusion in the complexity. The integrated stakes actually simplify decision-making. In some ways, what serves Reeves's long-term viability aligns with both investment returns and community impact. Mia studied me with the insight of long friendship. "You've changed, you know. 6 months ago, you maintained such rigid separation between your family history and your professional identity. Now you're finding strength in connecting them." Her observation captured something essential about my evolution. Not a return to family dependence, but an integration of all aspects of my experience into a more complete leadership approach. The rejection that had once defined my relationship with Reeves Manufacturing had transformed into a unique perspective that now contributed to its potential renewal. "Life rarely follows the narratives we construct," I replied. "Sometimes the very connections we resist contain the resources we need for the next challenge." As we reached my office, I found myself looking forward to the all-hands meeting the following day. Not just as Vertex's representative or as the founder's granddaughter, but as someone uniquely positioned to help translate crisis into opportunity. The path forward would be challenging, the outcome uncertain, but the integration of professional capability and personal commitment provided a foundation stronger than either alone could offer. The all-hands meeting at Reeves Manufacturing was unlike any company gathering I'd attended before. The expansive production floor had been transformed into a town hall space, with employees from every department assembled to hear leadership's response to the GlobeTech threat. The anxiety in the room was palpable. Major corporate acquisitions typically signaled layoffs and uncertainty for competitors. I stood slightly to the side as my father addressed the assembled staff, his voice carrying clearly through the facility where 3 generations of the Reeves family had built their legacy. "Many of you have already heard about GlobeTech's acquisition of Westford Industries," he began, not minimizing the situation. "I won't pretend this doesn't present significant challenges for our company. GlobeTech has resources we can't match and a reputation for aggressive competitive tactics." The honesty in his approach struck me. The Richard Reeves I knew 7 years ago would have projected unwarranted confidence, dismissing concerns with platitudes about company strength. This man acknowledged reality while maintaining composure. "But Reeves Manufacturing has faced existential challenges before," he continued. "My father started this company during an economic recession, when conventional wisdom said manufacturing was too risky. When overseas competition threatened our market position in the 90s, we adapted and found new niches. The GlobeTech situation isn't our first crisis. It's simply the next opportunity to demonstrate what makes this company special." He gestured toward the Innovation Center visible through large windows at the far end of the production floor. "For the past 6 months, we've been implementing a transformation strategy to modernize our operations. Today, we're accelerating and expanding that strategy in ways that will position Reeves not as a competitor to GlobeTech, but as a pioneer in markets they haven't even considered." As he outlined the strategic pivot we'd developed the previous day, I watched the employees' expressions shift from anxiety to cautious interest. When he invited Carter Wilson to explain the technological innovations that would differentiate our products, genuine excitement began replacing fear. The presentation concluded with Patricia Lowry detailing how each department would contribute to the accelerated timeline, emphasizing that success would require contributions from every individual present. "This won't be easy," my father acknowledged, as he reclaimed the floor. "We're compressing 18 months of transformation into 6. We'll need longer hours, greater collaboration, and solutions to problems we haven't even identified yet. But I believe in the people in this room. Your creativity, your commitment, your capability to rise to this challenge." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled workforce. "I also want to address the concern I know many of you have, whether your jobs are secure. I can't make promises about what might happen if we fail to execute this strategy effectively. What I can promise is transparency throughout the process, and my personal commitment to fighting for every position in this company." It was the right note to strike, honest about the stakes without creating panic. As employees began asking questions, I noticed how different departmental representatives answered based on their areas of expertise, rather than deferring every inquiry to executive leadership. The collaborative approach we'd been nurturing was evident in this crisis response. When an assembly line worker asked about investment commitment given the increased capital requirements, my father turned toward me. "That's a question better," answered by our investment partner, Olivia Reeves from Vertex Capital. All eyes shifted in my direction as I stepped forward. Most employees knew I was the founder's granddaughter and current CEO of Vertex, but many probably didn't know the full history of my estrangement and return. Vertex Capital invested in Reeves Manufacturing because we recognized its potential for transformation, I began. The GlobeTech situation accelerates our timeline, but doesn't change our fundamental assessment of that potential. Our investment committee will review the revised capital requirements next week, but I'm confident we'll continue supporting the strategy we've developed. I paused, considering how to address the personal dimension without letting it overshadow the business reality. On a more personal note, I grew up visiting this facility. My grandfather showed me these production lines when I was barely tall enough to see over the equipment. I understand that Reeves Manufacturing isn't just a company. It's a community that has supported families for generations. That legacy factors into Vertex's commitment alongside traditional investment metrics. The acknowledgement of both business and personal stakes seemed to resonate with the assembled employees. As the meeting concluded and people returned to their departments with renewed purpose, several approached me with stories about my grandfather or questions about Vertex's involvement going forward. Their engagement reflected not just concern for their jobs, but genuine investment in the company's future. My father found me as the floor cleared. "Thank you for being here. Your presence made a difference." "They responded well to the strategy," I observed. "The question is whether we can execute against such an aggressive timeline. That's where I need your help beyond the capital." "Infusion," he replied. "Vertex has connections throughout the technology and manufacturing sectors that could accelerate our progress. Potential suppliers, distribution partners, talent with specialized expertise." His request surprised me, slightly. For months, he had carefully maintained operational independence while accepting strategic guidance. Now, he was explicitly acknowledging the value Vertex could bring beyond financial investment. "We'll need to formalize the expanded partnership structure," I noted. "The original agreement limited Vertex's operational involvement to protect your management autonomy during the transition period. I'm proposing we modify that arrangement. The circumstances have changed, and artificial barriers between our organizations no longer serve either party's interests." This shift represented significant evolution in both the business relationship and my father's approach to leadership. The man who had once dismissed my business acumen was now actively seeking deeper integration with my company's resources and expertise. "I'll have our team draft a proposed amendment to the partnership agreement," I agreed. In the meantime, I'll connect Carter with our technology advisors to explore potential collaborations on the sensor integration challenges. As we walked toward his office to discuss specific partnership opportunities, Harrison Wells intercepted us with an urgent expression. "Richard, Olivia, Sullivan Medical just called. They've already been contacted by GlobeTech with an offer to switch suppliers if they commit before our new contract is finalized next month." Sullivan Medical represented nearly 15% of Reeves's annual revenue, a cornerstone client whose loss would significantly impact the company's stability during its transformation period. "How aggressive was the offer?" my father asked. 20% below our pricing with guaranteed 5-year terms, Harrison replied grimly. "We can't match those numbers without operating at a loss." The predatory timing was classic GlobeTech, targeting key clients during the vulnerable period between acquisition announcement and completed integration. They were moving even faster than we had anticipated. "We need to meet with Sullivan immediately," my father said. "Not just sales representatives, senior leadership. We need to make our case directly." "Their CEO is traveling in Europe this week," Harrison noted. "The earliest their executive team could meet is next Wednesday." "That's too late," I interjected. "GlobeTech is creating artificial urgency to force a decision before we can respond. We need to counteract that immediately." A possibility occurred to me, one that illustrated the potential value of deeper partnership between Reeves and Vertex. Sullivan's CEO, James Montgomery, is speaking at the European Medical Manufacturing Summit this week. I'm scheduled to deliver the keynote address tomorrow morning. My father caught my meaning immediately. "You could arrange a meeting while you're both there." "I can do better than that. Montgomery and I serve on the Innovation Policy Committee together. I can request a private dinner discussion tonight if I leave immediately for the airport." Harrison looked between us, his expression reflecting the stakes involved. "Do you think a personal approach will be effective against such aggressive pricing incentives?" "Price isn't everything in medical manufacturing," I replied. "Quality assurance, reliability, compliance expertise, these factors carry significant weight, especially with recent regulatory changes in the European market. Montgomery built Sullivan's reputation on quality rather than cost leadership. If we can demonstrate how our innovation strategy aligns with their long-term positioning better than GlobeTech's volume approach, it's worth trying," my father agreed. "What do you need from us to prepare for the conversation?" "Send me the detailed specifications for the Sullivan relationship. Not just contracts and pricing, but quality metrics, satisfaction reports, collaborative development history. I need to understand the relationship's full value beyond financial terms." As I prepared to leave, my father walked me to my car. "I appreciate you leveraging your personal connection in this situation," he said. "I know the boundaries between Vertex and Reeves have been important to you." "The circumstances demand integration rather than separation," I replied, echoing his earlier observation about partnership barriers. "Montgomery respects Vertex's approach to innovation investment. If that credibility can help protect Reeves's client relationship during this vulnerable period, it makes sense to utilize it." He nodded thoughtfully. 7 years ago, I saw your connection to Vertex as a rejection of Reeves. Now I'm beginning to see it as providing exactly what Reeves needs at this critical moment." The observation was striking, not just for its insight, but for the complete reversal it represented from his perspective when I first chose my independent path. What he had once viewed as betrayal, he now recognized as complementary strength. "Different journeys provide different perspectives," I said. "Perhaps we needed both to navigate this particular challenge." As I drove to the airport for my emergency flight to Europe, I reflected on how thoroughly the GlobeTech crisis had accelerated the evolution of both Reeves Manufacturing and my reconnection with my family legacy. Challenges that might have unfolded gradually over months or years were now compressed into days and weeks, forcing rapid adaptation and deeper integration. The Sullivan situation perfectly illustrated this acceleration. In our original partnership structure, Vertex's contribution would have remained primarily financial and strategic, with operational decisions and client relationships managed exclusively by Reeves' leadership. Now we were leveraging the combined strengths of both organizations, Reeves' manufacturing expertise and established client relationships alongside Vertex's innovation credibility and executive network. This integration extended beyond business transactions to include personal dimensions as well. My father was actively seeking my contribution not just as an investor, but as a business leader with valuable perspective and connections. I found myself willingly stepping into an advocate role for the company I had once defined myself in opposition to. The boundaries I had carefully maintained between Vertex and Reeves, between professional investment and personal history, between my independent identity and my family legacy, were becoming more permeable. Not dissolving entirely, but evolving into interfaces where value could flow in both directions rather than walls that prevented connection. As my flight took off, I prepared for the conversation with James Montgomery that might help determine Reeves Manufacturing's ability to weather the GlobeTech challenge. The stakes were higher than I had anticipated when first considering my family's investment request, the challenges more complex, the potential outcomes more significant for everyone involved. Yet I felt a strange confidence despite these elevated stakes, not the brittle certainty that comes from denying complexity, but the grounded assurance that emerges from embracing it fully. By allowing the personal and professional dimensions of this situation to inform rather than conflict with each other, I had access to a more complete range of resources for addressing the challenges ahead. The journey to this integration hadn't been smooth or predictable. It had required relinquishing old narratives that no longer served. My father's about what constituted legitimate business success, mine about the necessary separation between my independent achievements and my family history. Neither of us had anticipated ending up here, yet the unexpected path had led to possibilities neither of our original visions had encompassed. As the plane reached cruising altitude, I opened my laptop to review the Sullivan manufacturing relationship, materials my father had sent. The comprehensive information reflected both Reeves's deep understanding of their clients' needs and my father's trust in my ability to represent the company's interests effectively. Both elements would be crucial for the conversation ahead, a conversation that would draw on every dimension of my experience, both personal and professional, to help secure the future of the company that had once rejected me and now welcomed. My full contribution. The European Medical Manufacturing Summit was held at the Grand Hotel Europa in Vienna, a fitting venue for discussions that would shape the future of an entire industry sector. I arrived just as the evening reception was beginning, having come directly from the airport after a 9-hour flight spent reviewing Sullivan Medical's history with Reeves Manufacturing and developing a strategy for my conversation with James Montgomery. The opulent ballroom bustled with industry leaders from across Europe and North America, many representing companies that competed directly with GlobeTech in various markets. News of the Westford acquisition had clearly traveled fast. I overheard snippets of concerned conversation about market consolidation and the implications for smaller manufacturers. I spotted James Montgomery near the center of the room, engaged in animated discussion with several European hospital administrators. At 62, Montgomery had built Sullivan Medical from a modest surgical equipment supplier into a leading medical manufacturing company with global reach. Like my grandfather, he had prioritized quality and innovation over rapid expansion, a philosophy that had served Sullivan well during industry turbulence. When Montgomery noticed me approaching, surprise briefly registered on his face before he extended a welcoming hand. "Olivia Reeves, I didn't expect to see you until tomorrow's keynote. When did you arrive?" "Just now," I replied, shaking his hand. "I was hoping we might arrange a private dinner this evening. There's a matter of mutual interest I'd like to discuss." His eyebrows rose slightly at the urgency in my tone. I actually have dinner plans with the Regulatory Affairs Commissioner in about 30 minutes. This concerns recent developments, with GlobeTech and potential implications for Sullivan's supply chain stability, I said quietly, ensuring nearby attendees couldn't overhear. Understanding dawned in his expression. Ah, I see. He checked his watch. I have some time before my dinner engagement. The hotel has a private lounge for conference speakers, shall we? The executive lounge offered welcome quiet after the reception's busy atmosphere. As we settled into comfortable chairs by a window overlooking Vienna's historic architecture, Montgomery wasted no time addressing the situation. I assume this concerns GlobeTech's offer to Sullivan regarding our manufacturing supply chain? He asked directly. You've already been approached, I noted, not entirely surprised by the confirmation. Their CEO called me personally yesterday, quite unusual for initial discussions about supply contracts. They presented what they described as a transitional opportunity following their Westford acquisition. A 20% reduction in component pricing with guaranteed 5-year terms, I supplied, sharing what Harrison had reported. Montgomery nodded. They emphasized the limited window for acceptance, decisions required before month-end for preferential terms. The artificial urgency was exactly as we'd anticipated. GlobeTech was moving aggressively to secure key clients before their targets could develop counter-strategies. I'd like to discuss Sullivan's relationship with Reeves. Manufacturing in light of these developments, I said, placing my tablet on the table between us. But first, I should clarify my role in this conversation. Montgomery looked genuinely curious. I'll admit I was wondering. Your Vertex Capital biography mentions you're Richard Reeves's daughter, but I wasn't aware you had formal involvement with Reeves Manufacturing. It's a recent development, I explained. Vertex made a significant investment in Reeves 6 months ago to fund comprehensive transformation and innovation initiatives. I serve on the board, and as a strategic advisor, while maintaining my primary position as Vertex's CEO. Interesting arrangement, he observed. Family businesses and investment firms often make uncomfortable bedfellows. In this case, the relationship has proven complementary rather than conflicting, I replied. My background provides unique perspective on both Reeves's manufacturing legacy and the innovation landscape that's reshaping the industry. Montgomery studied me with increased interest. And you've flown to Vienna specifically to discuss our supply relationship? The GlobeTech situation creates both challenges and opportunities for companies throughout the medical manufacturing ecosystem, I said. Given Sullivan's importance as a Reeves client and your own company's quality-focused positioning, I believed a direct conversation would be valuable. I appreciate the personal approach, Montgomery acknowledged. Though I must say, GlobeTech's offer presents compelling financial advantages that are difficult to dismiss in today's margin-pressured healthcare environment. This was the central challenge: how to counter purely financial incentives with less tangible but equally important considerations. I took a calculated risk by addressing this directly. James, you and I have served on the Innovation Policy Committee for 3 years now. In that time, I've observed your consistent advocacy for quality standards that exceed regulatory minimums. Sullivan's reputation wasn't built on being the lowest-cost option, but on providing medical manufacturers with components that reduce failure rates and enhance patient outcomes. He nodded, neither confirming nor denying my characterization. GlobeTech's business model fundamentally contradicts that philosophy, I continued. Their acquisition strategy prioritizes volume production and cost efficiency over innovation and quality enhancement. Their component pricing reflects this philosophy. It's designed to capture market share, not to support continuous improvement. A fair assessment of their approach, Montgomery conceded, though they would argue their scale creates efficiencies that allow for both lower pricing and adequate quality. Adequate is precisely the issue, I countered. Sullivan has never aimed for merely adequate component quality. I opened a file on my tablet displaying quality metrics from the past 5 years of Reeves's relationship with Sullivan. Your engineers have consistently pushed our specifications beyond industry standards, particularly in failure tolerance and material purity. Montgomery leaned forward to examine the data. These metrics reflect collaborative development efforts rather than standard supply agreements. Exactly. The relationship between Sullivan and Reeves has never been purely transactional. It's a strategic alliance focused on continuous advancement. I swiped to a new screen showing our accelerated innovation timeline. That advancement is about to accelerate dramatically. For the next 15 minutes, I outlined the strategic pivot Reeves was implementing in response to the GlobeTech challenge. I explained how our embedded sensor technology would transform component functionality in ways that aligned perfectly with Sullivan's next-generation product roadmap. I shared preliminary test results demonstrating performance improvements that would directly enhance Sullivan's competitive position in specialized surgical equipment. This development timeline is remarkably aggressive, Montgomery observed, examining the projected milestones. Necessity driving innovation, I replied. GlobeTech's move forced us to accelerate initiatives that were already in development. The result is actually a more focused approach with potentially greater impact. Impressive response, he acknowledged, but implementation still carries significant risk, particularly given such compressed timelines. Risk is inherent in transformation, I agreed. But consider the alternative risk, switching to a supplier whose fundamental business model prioritizes standardization over innovation, precisely when healthcare technology is demanding unprecedented specialization. Montgomery sat back, considering the implications. Your point about alignment is compelling. Sullivan's 5-year strategic plan emphasizes advanced functionality that GlobeTech's commodity approach simply wouldn't support. He paused. However, the immediate financial impact of their offer cannot be ignored in our quarterly performance considerations. This was the moment to bridge immediate concerns with long-term vision, a challenge I'd faced repeatedly at Vertex when guiding companies through transformative periods. What if we could address both considerations? I proposed. Reeves can't match GlobeTech's pricing across all components. Attempting to do so would undermine the very innovation that creates our unique value, but we could develop a transitional pricing structure for critical components that provides immediate margin relief while establishing preferential access to our next-generation technology. Montgomery's interest was evident. What would such an arrangement look like specifically? I outlined a proposed framework. Targeted price reductions on key components most affected by margin pressure, accelerated co-development of next-generation technology with exclusivity periods for Sullivan, and shared investment in specialized testing facilities that would benefit both companies' innovation pipelines. This approach addresses your immediate financial considerations while strengthening the strategic alignment that truly differentiates both our companies, I concluded. It's not about matching GlobeTech's offer, but creating an alternative that serves Sullivan's complete strategic objectives rather than just quarterly cost metrics. Montgomery was silent for several moments, weighing the proposal against GlobeTech's straightforward pricing incentives. Finally, he nodded thoughtfully. Your father never mentioned your skill at strategic negotiation, he said with the hint of a smile. I've known Richard for 15 years, and this approach reflects a different perspective than I've typically seen from Reeves Manufacturing. Different journeys provide different insights, I replied. My experience at Vertex has focused on identifying sustainable competitive advantage rather than short-term financial optimization. In this case, that perspective suggests our company's long-term interests align in ways that GlobeTech's model fundamentally can't accommodate. A compelling argument, he acknowledged. I'll need to discuss this framework with our executive team, of course. But I'm inclined to explore this alternative rather than rushing into GlobeTech's artificially urgent offer. As Montgomery prepared to leave for his dinner engagement, he asked a question that momentarily caught me off guard. "If you don't mind my asking, why did you personally make this trip? Surely someone from Reeves's sales leadership could have presented similar arguments." The question invited reflection on the integrated motivations driving my involvement. Partly because my position at Vertex lends additional credibility to the innovation roadmap, I replied honestly, but also because I understand both the business case and the family legacy at stake. 300 families depend on Reeves Manufacturing for their livelihoods. That responsibility transcends ordinary business considerations. Montgomery nodded with evident respect. "I understand that perspective. Well, Sullivan began with my father refinancing his home to buy his first manufacturing equipment. 60 years later, we employ over 500 people, each representing families and communities that depend on decisions like the one we're discussing." As we parted ways, Montgomery promised to contact me within 48 hours regarding Sullivan's decision. I watched him leave the lounge, knowing I had done everything possible to present a compelling alternative to Globetech's predatory offer. Whether it would be sufficient remained to be seen, but the integrated approach, addressing both immediate financial concerns and long-term strategic alignment, represented our strongest possible position. Rather than returning to my hotel room, I found a quiet corner of the lounge to call my father with an update. Despite the late hour in Vienna, it was still business hours in the United States. "The conversation went as well as could be expected," I reported after explaining Montgomery's initial position. "He's receptive to our alternative framework, but needs to consult with his executive team. He promised a decision within 48 hours. "That's encouraging," my father replied, relief evident in his voice. "The Sullivan contract is critical to maintaining stability during our transition period." "Montgomery understands the strategic alignment," I assured him. "The question is whether immediate financial pressures will outweigh long-term considerations in their decision-making process." "You've given us our best chance," he said. "Whatever happens, your willingness to make this trip on such short notice makes a significant difference." The appreciation in his voice reflected our evolving relationship, not the obligatory gratitude of someone receiving assistance, but the genuine recognition of a valuable contribution from a respected partner. "I'll deliver the keynote tomorrow morning as scheduled, then return on the afternoon flight," I informed him. "We should have Montgomery's decision before I land." After ending the call, I remained in the quiet lounge, watching lights illuminate Vienna's historic skyline as evening deepened into night. The journey that had brought me to this moment was far from what I had imagined when leaving my parents' home 7 years earlier, determined to build a life entirely separate from my family legacy. Yet here I was, leveraging my independent accomplishments to help preserve and transform that very legacy. The separation I had once insisted upon had created the unique perspective and capabilities that now proved valuable for addressing the challenges Reeves Manufacturing faced. What I had viewed as rejection had ultimately produced resilience and insight that conventional paths might never have developed. The painful irony of being asked to rescue the company that had once dismissed my potential had evolved into something more nuanced, an opportunity to integrate disparate aspects of my experience into a more complete approach to both business and family relationships. Neither capitulation to old expectations nor rigid rejection of connection, but a new synthesis that honored both my independent journey and my family roots. As I finally headed to my hotel room to prepare for the following day's keynote address, I reflected on how thoroughly the Globetech Challenge had accelerated this integration. Crisis had compressed years of potential evolution into weeks of necessary adaptation, forcing both my father and me to move beyond comfortable positions toward more collaborative engagement. The outcome with Sullivan remained uncertain, but the approach itself represented important progress, not just in business strategy, but in recognizing how seemingly conflicting elements of our lives can ultimately prove complementary when circumstances demand their integration. I delivered my keynote address at the European Medical Manufacturing Summit the following morning, to an audience of industry leaders particularly attentive, given the recent GlobeTech announcement. My presentation focused on innovation investment, strategies during market consolidation, a topic that had gained immediate relevance overnight. Without specifically mentioning Reeves Manufacturing's situation, I articulated principles that supported our alternative approach to Sullivan Medical. Consolidation creates apparent efficiencies, I noted during a key section, but often sacrifices the specialized innovation that drives next-generation advancements. The most successful companies maintain strategic partnerships that prioritize collaborative development over simple cost reduction, creating sustainable competitive advantage rather than temporary margin relief. The message resonated with the audience, particularly representatives from mid-sized companies facing similar challenges to Sullivan. During the networking session following my presentation, several approached to discuss specific applications of these principles to their situations. I noticed James Montgomery observing these conversations from across the room, his expression thoughtful as he witnessed the impact of the perspective I'd shared with him privately the previous evening. As I prepared to leave for my flight home, Montgomery intercepted me near the exit. "Excellent presentation," he said, falling into step beside me. "Particularly relevant given current circumstances." "Thank you. I hope it provided useful frameworks for navigating the changing landscape." He nodded, then lowered his voice slightly. "I've been in communication with our executive team regarding our discussion last night. We'd like to explore the alternative framework you proposed rather than proceeding with GlobeTech's offer." Relief washed through me, though I maintained a professional demeanor. "I'm pleased to hear that. When would you like to begin detailed discussions?" "My team is prepared to meet with Reeves representatives tomorrow if that's possible. We'll need to formalize terms quickly given GlobeTech's pressure for an immediate decision." "I'll ensure our team is ready," I promised, already mentally rearranging my schedule to participate in these critical negotiations. Montgomery hesitated, before adding, "Your involvement made a significant difference, Olivia. The combination of Vertex's innovation credibility and your personal understanding of both companies' positioning presented an alternative path we might otherwise have missed while focused on immediate financial metrics." His acknowledgement validated the integrated approach I'd taken, leveraging both my position at Vertex and my connection to Reeves to create a more compelling case than either perspective alone could have provided. During my flight home, I coordinated preparations for the Sullivan negotiations, connecting our teams and establishing clear objectives. By the time I landed, a preliminary framework had been developed that addressed both Sullivan's immediate financial considerations and our long-term strategic alignment. My father met me at the airport, an unexpected gesture that signaled the importance he placed on this development. "Sullivan's decision to proceed with us rather than GlobeTech changes everything," he said as we walked to his car. "It not only preserves 15% of our current revenue, but sends a powerful message to other clients who might be considering GlobeTech's offers." Montgomery recognized the strategic alignment, I replied. "Our innovation roadmap addresses capabilities his team has been seeking from suppliers for years. Once we framed the discussion around long-term partnership rather than immediate pricing, the decision became clearer." As we drove toward Reeves Manufacturing headquarters where the Sullivan team would arrive the following morning, my father broached a subject I hadn't anticipated. "The board met while you were in Vienna," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "In light of recent developments and your crucial role in preserving the Sullivan relationship, they've approved a significant modification to our leadership structure." I glanced at him curiously. "What kind of modification?" "They've created a new position, Co-Chief Executive Officer focused on innovation and strategic partnerships." He paused before continuing. "They'd like to offer you this role, to serve alongside me during this critical transformation period." The proposal stunned me. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have considered any formal leadership position at Reeves. Manufacturing. Even as our business partnership had evolved, I'd maintained clear separation between my primary role at Vertex and my advisory position with Reeves. This wouldn't require you to leave Vertex, my father clarified, sensing my hesitation. The board envisions a dual role that leverages your unique position bridging both organizations during this pivotal period. Once we successfully navigate the GlobeTech challenge and complete our strategic repositioning, we could reassess the arrangement. I considered the implications carefully. What prompted this proposal specifically? Several factors converged, he replied. Your success with Sullivan demonstrated the value of your integrated perspective. The accelerated innovation timeline requires closer alignment between our operations and Vertex's investment approach. Most significantly, the board recognized that our current structure creates unnecessary barriers between complementary capabilities at a time when we need every possible advantage. His explanation made strategic sense, yet the personal dimension couldn't be ignored. After years of defining myself in opposition to Reeves Manufacturing, I was being invited to help lead its transformation, not by surrendering my independent identity, but by bringing my full, hard-won experience to the challenge. I'll need to discuss this with Vertex's leadership team, I said finally. The dual role would have significant implications for my time allocation and potential conflicts of interest. Of course, he acknowledged. Take whatever time you need to evaluate the proposal. The board understands the complexity of the arrangement. We arrived at Reeves headquarters to find the executive team already preparing for the following day's negotiations with Sullivan. The energy in the building had transformed since my previous visit. The accelerated innovation timeline requires closer alignment between our operations and Vertex's investment approach. Most significantly, the board recognized that our current structure creates unnecessary barriers between complementary capabilities at a time when we need every possible advantage. His explanation made strategic sense, yet the personal dimension couldn't be ignored. After years of defining myself in opposition to Reeves Manufacturing, I was being invited to help lead its transformation, not by surrendering my independent identity, but by bringing my full, hard-won experience to the challenge. I'll need to discuss this with Vertex's leadership team, I said finally. The dual role would have significant implications for my time allocation and potential conflicts of interest. Of course, he acknowledged. Take whatever time you need to evaluate the proposal. The board understands the complexity of the arrangement. We arrived at Reeves headquarters to find the executive team already preparing for the following day's negotiations with Sullivan. The energy in the building had transformed since my previous visit. Urgency remained, but desperation had been replaced by focused determination. News of Sullivan's decision to explore our alternative framework, rather than accepting GlobeTech's offer, had inspired renewed confidence throughout the organization. As we entered the conference room where strategy discussions were underway, Patricia Lowry was presenting production adaptation plans to support the accelerated innovation timeline. We've identified 3 production lines that can be reconfigured for next-generation component manufacturing within 60 days, she explained, highlighting areas on a facility diagram. This would provide sufficient capacity for Sullivan's immediate requirements while we complete the broader modernization plan. Carter Wilson followed with updates on technology development. The embedded sensor integration has proceeded faster than projected. We've resolved the calibration issues that were creating inconsistent performance in early prototypes. The Sullivan-specific application is now ready for scaled testing. Their progress reflected the focused intensity that had characterized Reeves Manufacturing since the GlobeTech announcement. Teams working across traditional boundaries to accelerate development, leadership removing obstacles rather than imposing constraints, resources allocated based on strategic impact rather than departmental budgets. During a brief break in the presentations, Harrison Wells approached me with uncharacteristic warmth. Your success with Montgomery may have saved this company, he said quietly. Many of us have worked here our entire careers. What you did in Vienna matters to hundreds of families. His acknowledgement surprised me, given his initial skepticism about Vertex's investment and my involvement. The shared crisis had apparently transcended previous reservations about my role and relationship with the company. As evening approached and the preparation session concluded, my father invited me to join him for dinner at Riverside Grill, the restaurant where our family had celebrated company milestones throughout my childhood. The choice of venue seemed deliberate, bridging business discussions and more personal connections. Over dinner, he shared memories I hadn't heard before, challenges my grandfather had faced during Reeves Manufacturing's early years, risks taken. That could have ended the company, but instead propelled its growth, values that had guided decisions when financial pressures suggested different paths. Your grandfather often said that crisis reveals character more than it creates it, he reflected. The GlobeTech situation is proving that the challenge before us required integration rather than division, both practically and personally. I'll consider the board's proposal seriously, I promised. Whatever I decide about the formal role, I'm committed to helping Reeves navigate this transformation successfully. As we finished dinner, my father hesitated before sharing one final thought. Your mother asked me to tell you she's proud of what you've accomplished, both at Vertex and with the Sullivan situation. She's respected your boundaries about personal reconciliation, but wants you to know her perspective has changed significantly over these years. This indirect message from my mother touched something deeper than business considerations or strategic alignments. Despite our cautious lunch several weeks earlier, we had maintained careful distance in our personal reconnection. Her acknowledgement of pride in my accomplishments, conveyed through my father rather than expressed directly, reflected both respect for my boundaries and desire for greater connection. The following morning, the Sullivan medical team arrived for negotiations earlier than expected. James Montgomery had personally made the trip along with his senior leadership, a signal of the importance they placed on the discussion. Our teams worked through the day developing a comprehensive agreement that addressed immediate pricing considerations while establishing a framework for long-term strategic partnership. The final arrangement exceeded our initial proposal in several respects. Sullivan committed to expanded co-development initiatives beyond what we had outlined, including shared investment in specialized testing facilities. They extended exclusivity arrangements for next-generation technology applications in key product categories. Most significantly, they agreed to a public announcement about the strategic partnership, a direct counter to GlobeTech's market positioning, and a clear signal to other clients considering their offers. As Montgomery and my father signed the agreement late that afternoon, the significance of the moment extended beyond the specific business arrangement. This wasn't merely preservation of an existing client relationship, but the creation of a new model for partnership that directly challenged GlobeTech's consolidation approach. It represented a clear alternative path forward, not just for Reeves Manufacturing, but potentially for the industry segment more broadly. After the Sullivan team departed, spontaneous celebration erupted throughout the facility. The successful negotiation represented the first major victory against the GlobeTech threat, tangible evidence that our strategic pivot could succeed, despite the resource disparity between our organizations. Amid the celebration, I found a quiet moment to call Mia and update her on developments, including the board's unexpected leadership proposal. Co-CEO, she repeated thoughtfully after I explained the situation. That's quite a shift from your position 6 months ago. It's not a decision I'm taking lightly, I assured her. There are significant considerations for Vertex's operations and potential conflicts to manage carefully. The business considerations are straightforward, Mia replied. We can establish appropriate governance structures and disclosure protocols to address any conflicts. The real question is whether this integrated role aligns with your personal evolution. Her observation cut to the heart of the matter. The formal position represented more than a business arrangement. It symbolized a fundamentally different relationship with my family legacy than I had maintained for 7 years. Accepting would acknowledge that my independent journey and my family history could coexist and even complement each other, rather than requiring rigid separation. I think it might, I admitted. Not as a return to what was, but as creation of something new that incorporates everything I've learned and built during these years apart. As I ended the call and rejoined the celebration, I watched teams from different departments sharing their contributions to the successful negotiation. The competitive threat hadn't disappeared. GlobeTech remained a formidable challenge requiring continued innovation and adaptation. But something fundamental had shifted in our approach to that challenge. We had moved from defensive reaction to proactive creation, from preserving what existed to building something better. In that moment, I recognized that my own journey had followed a similar progression, from defining myself in opposition to my family's expectations to creating an integrated identity that honored both my independent accomplishments and my connections to something larger than myself. The path forward wasn't about choosing between these dimensions, but about leveraging their complementary strengths to address challenges neither perspective alone could fully navigate. The board's proposed leadership role offered formal acknowledgement of this integration, not requiring abandonment of what I'd built at Vertex, but creating space for both aspects of my experience to contribute to something meaningful. Whatever I decided about the specific arrangement, the underlying principle had already transformed my approach to both business and personal reconnection. As evening fell and employees gradually dispersed, I found myself alone in the innovation center that had been a cramped, outdated corner just 6 months earlier. The space now hummed with potential, filled with technology that would create capabilities beyond what either my father or I had imagined when beginning this partnership. The transformation of this physical space paralleled the evolution happening in less tangible dimensions, relationships rebuilding on new foundations, leadership approaches adapting to changing circumstances, boundaries becoming interfaces rather than barriers. Crisis had accelerated what might otherwise have taken years to develop, creating opportunity for integration where separation had previously seemed the only viable path. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. So, this one hit the mark. You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.